Okay, final project.
Hey guys. Thanks for coming today. This is our model. All right.
Let me share my screen.
Share with the audios enabling.
Yeah, give me a second.
It looks like the model collapsed on you guys, and it's keeping you on the floor.
Like a Godzilla coming.
Oh, there we go.
All right.
All right.
All right. So, ready?
Yeah.
All right. Click. Good afternoon. My name is Takin.
And my name is Yizhan.
Our thesis is called Hollow Figures, and it explores what it would mean to give as much architectural attention to what is not as we give to what is. We began the thesis by cataloging how solid, void, figure, and ground can be used to create different but still equal relationships. A void, often silent yet powerful in its presence, has historically been used to separate, redact, and remove. Our thesis looks to activate the void as a connector and no longer see it as a separator.
So we studied different stances of the previous architect on the part to whole discourse and shifting our focus towards a new understanding of this relationship by emphasizing the void. So by taking a closer look at Piranesi's Compromisio, we began to define the parts of their own volume. And the notion of the whole is defined through the relationship between the different autonomous part, yet the third thing, the non-figure, the void within Compromisio, is a medium which establishes those relationships.
Our project is the replacement of the Paul Henry Spaak building that houses the central functions of the EU government in Brussels. We selected the European Parliament for our site as it not only involves its own part-to-whole relationship within the city, but also brings attention to the political relationship of the Parliament regarding a collection of nations. This is a bilaterally symmetrical, high-tech neoclassical building, which is set in the city that was built on the idea of inequality. It is situated in the heart of the European capital, founded on the exploitation of non-represented people from far away.
So looking at the relationship of the city and the park, we notice that the city is dictated by lines of symmetry, while the park, on the other hand, acts as an anomaly to the city and is dictated by fragmentations. The notion of a parliament in itself evokes a sense of multiplicity, distinction, and power. Our proposal for the Paul Henry Spaak building emphasizes on those qualities through continuous voids. The project begins by taking apart different programmatic volumes of a parliament and defining them as their own objects. We then decided to take the existing building and pull its program apart and subject it to intersecting voids that were given as much figural presence as those existing components. The volumes, however, maintain their own identity and purpose within the parliament, yet relate to one another when placed together.
We can see how each part of the parliament is separated to its own autonomous volume, which reacts to the surrounding context. The void now acts as a connector between the different volumes of the parliament, as well as the city. By cutting through the opaque autonomous volumes of the parliament, the void not only serves to establish an internal connection, but also as a means to reveal the inner complexity of the parliament. By covering the void in a highly perforated reflective copper material, we use these faceted planes to activate the void in contrast to the muted solids.
So in this plan, it shows how the void is connected to connect the building to the ground and integrates public circulation throughout the building. And in this plan, we see how each figure maintains its own presence and show us how the officials entered the building through the bridges which attach to the old parliament. And in this section, we can see how the hollow figure and what it's not is being emphasized through the perforated copper facade, while the figures are muted down with fritted glass. So here we see how the new parliament attaches to the old building through a bridge. And the atriums within each figure establishes a vertical relationship from within. And this is a view from underneath the project showing how the hollow figure emphasizes its own presence by creating a new reading from within the project.
So footnotes from within. For the ending of the presentation, we decided to look into the experience of the back of house users of this building, as there is seen as a void in relationship to the intended occupants of the building. First, the security guard.
I've been working for the old parliament for the past 10 years, but this new building scared the hell out of me. At first, I thought all the holes and paths in it would be a nightmare to look after. But after going deeper into the layout, the integration of the public in the building is quite streamlined. Even though it's open, it is safe as there are many security buffers between each section. Here, take a look at this. Right now, I'm keeping an eye on Sector C, which has the German, Italian, and French offices. I'm able to view many things at once because of these enormous voids that are cut through the architecture. So instead of having to do everything through cameras, I've realized that I can actually see for myself to a degree that surprises me, making my job more interesting.
And then we take a look at the janitor and his experience cleaning the void.
They hired me about 6 months ago after I left my country looking for a fresh start. I was lucky to get the job because they had just finished building these towers that expand and hover over the old parliament. I have learned my way around this place, or at least the parts I am allowed to work at. Today, I'm looking after the European Nations Hall and the giant copper void. Working here is strange. Sometimes I can't tell whether I'm inside or outside the building. While I see everyone going on about their day, I feel like they don't see me. It is not because I'm a refugee or that I look a certain way, but when I work here, I'm invisible. I am a hidden figure. I used to be a doctor in Aleppo before I moved here, and I'm grateful to have the job. But I'm not planning on staying a janitor forever.
Considering the scale of these voids, we notice that this project is quite experiential, where one goes inside the void and looks out to the surrounding city, creating a dialogue between the building and the site. By fighting for a tense equivalence between figure and void, we are taking this opportunity to express a new form of radical equality, where what is given only as much weight as what could be. So in other words, what's there now, which would translate to solid, figure, mass, would be held back in favor of the void. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna, could you stop sharing?
Yeah.
And
Let me see.
yeah.
Guys, I just love that line that you decided to end with. I think it's a good mantra for architecture. What did you say exactly? What is only as is never as important as what will be or what could be.
What is given only as much weight as what could be.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, here you're using it to talk about the difference between the absence, the figure that's represented by void versus the figure that's represented by mass. But you're also making a larger disciplinary claim here that has to do with context and has to do with the future, kind of the futuricity that's inherent maybe in architecture, and that perhaps sometimes we forget or we lose sight of in our drive to satisfy existing voices and fulfill expectations. I really appreciate that about your thesis. And to me, it makes it it is a thesis in the fullest sense of the word, because it's a way of suggesting what you want architecture to do in the world and how you intend it to operate. And it throws out the project. It goes beyond any specific project. Sorry, it's been a long day. It goes beyond any specific project and talks about the project of architecture as such. And to have a clear grasp on that and to articulate it so beautifully in your BARC thesis project is something to be commended.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
You know, I just think this is an extraordinary project, an extraordinary thesis, and what appears to be a remarkable collaboration. And a couple of things that I just want to say is, having seen this at its earlier moment, there were some wonderful things about it, and yet it looked like it was really a purely formal exercise that had the production of a few wonderful spaces, particularly the underside and the reflective areas. I think what is really advanced are the underpinnings that have toggled it more closely to the urban narrative that I think you get more fully. And then also, if you will, the kind of personal experience of the typically hidden figures of the janitor and the security guard. And those are elements that had not been brought into the equation when I last saw this. And yet it's those, I would say, the stakes in the ground of the urban and the personal that are giving the architectural opportunity to talk about these, as you've described it, these hollow figures as something that could have a public dimension. And I believe that it really is the idea of the privacy necessitated for all parliamentary kind of spaces that is given a kind of a doubling up or a coupling with the kind of generosity of public space, which is connective. And it to me feels like a really remarkable project that you all have done. It's remarkably smart as a work of urbanism, and I think of theater, because you've shared with us the theatrical, and then of the speculative nature of what that multiplication of reflection might be at both an urban scale and a personal scale. It's a terrifying building. It's a mega building. It's a frightening one that might be torn down not so long after it's built because of the fear it might induce if it were built cheaply. But on the other hand, it would be preserved with enormous polish if this were built extraordinarily well. And I think what I really appreciate about the way this has been presented is that one could imagine that it has created that kind of dream state by which one would want to build it well, and one would want it to be effectively a landmark that is every bit as important as the Guggenheim and plaster. So I just, I really applaud where you began and where I saw it before and where you've taken it to. So it's a great pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you.
I also really, I really appreciate this project in different ways. I really like what you've done in terms of the kind of urban condition. You know, you started with this notion of the park as a sort of field of scattered objects connected by continuous voids, and you create a great synthesis between these, what you start out with as these two distinct elements. And I think that transformation is really pretty brilliant, and it's done really well. I also love your sections. The sections that run through, I think, are phenomenal. I kept wondering about the difference between the visual read of the void that cuts through, that connects the spaces, and whether or not there was any other actual physical connection across those spaces. You know, I'm thinking of, you know, places like La Défense, where, you know, I can read the void, and I kept thinking, can I only read this void internally if I'm standing on one of those platforms, or does it actually connect out to the larger environment outside? Which would be the only thing I would likely push you to try to do, is to make that connection greater. But I think it's a phenomenal project, and a really interesting way of thinking the relationship between the voids and the figure all the way through.
So for the voids, we also used them to connect the building to the old Parliament, and I think we wanted to use them to further connect the building to the rest of the city. I think that's a really the next step for us to how to use that to connect the Parliament to the city more efficiently.
What I like about it is it's I mean, it's a nice attack on the monumental, and the way you carve it up these are massive buildings, and they're huge and imposing in their kind of character and coloring. But as a kind of comment on the existing condition and the previous building that you're tearing down, I think it's trying to propose a more accessible, let's say, governmental model of the necessity for the large building to house, right, so many offices and officials and collective space. But the way you shake it up, break it up, cut it, and fragment it, I think is its strongest case. And I agree with all of the more disciplinary like tropes of the figuring and figural space, etc. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think its strength is within its type, as a different kind of model, maybe even of urbanism, you know, of how to take big chunks of the city and break them down in novel ways that aren't as singular in the sense of each plot of land has its own building, which has its own identity, right? There is a communication going on between the pieces. It could even work as a kind of Hugh Ferris-like volume study of how to do urban plans like that. That different lots and different volumes in a city can speak to each other across space without even connecting necessarily, but then forming a different kind of anti-monument monument. Good job.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think there's ways I can imagine the building. First of all, as everybody said, really super terrific guys, and I so want to zoom in on this weird view of the two of you over the top of your building in this model in your window to try and see it in a different way. But it's just a terrific project. I think one thing that would be interesting is to imagine with all of the operations you've done that you're actually constructing a very different relationship between the inside of the parliament and the city around it. That is there and glimpsed at in a couple of your views, but arguably one of its great achievements is that it's not a highly choreographed, controlled relationship between the outside and what's in. That it's in fact at times it's almost weirdly accidental, serial. Like there's a number of different ways it plays out, and I think that would be a powerful thing to describe even more than you have here. I think in fact, it's not a singular relationship at all. It happens in so many different and unexpected, and I suspect even maybe unchoreographed ways that I would really try and draw that out as a strength of the project. And by the way, that's not just a job of being on the inside and looking out, but the fact that those citizens that I presume have something to do with the parliamentary activities as subjects are looking in and seeing things happening that would be interesting. And, in a spectacular way, it turns totally inside out. The only kind of parliament example I can think of, which is Norman Foster's rethinking of the Reichstag, where he, like you, discovers these weird ancillary spaces, in that case, a rooftop to look down on what's happening with all of the elected officials and totally upend the sort of conventional idea of where the public or civic space of the building is. Like it's the Reichstag, the rooftop of that building weirdly becomes one of the most public aspects of an architecture where that entity never even figures in the conventional typology. And in a way, your project has those kind of moments, and it would be interesting to really make claim that this is an architecture where things like lobbies and mezzanines, I mean, totally secondary sort of stuff in most architectural language and projects is really elevated here to a civic and public presence. I think it's absolutely great. And it would be the sort of architectural equivalent of you having elevated the security guard and the cleaner, that you're looking at those kind of spaces that evade the normal architectural imagination, and which, by the way, have no real defendants at all. Like there isn't an architect of mezzanines that I'm aware of that sort of built a career around that. And that you make that into a very different definition of what civic space is, i.e. that any space can become like that if we treat it appropriately and in that way. And I think your project holds those kind of things all over the place. And I'm sure there are attics and basements and loading docks that could be absolutely fantastic renderings of this project that normally is the sort of stuff architects go out of their way to ignore. I'd really
That's true.
make that your field of expertise and importance. It's really brilliant.
You know, it's funny, Brett, that you bring up the Reichstag, because the parliament building that this reminds me of, although it's a notoriously unsuccessful project, is the Enrique Morales Scottish Parliament building in Edinburgh. But I feel like that project was in a way trying to do what you guys have actually done in your undergraduate thesis much more successfully, which is balance a sense of monumentality with the a possibility for maybe not fragmentation, but maybe an acknowledgement of the kind of chunky, uneven openness that democracy might imply in built form. It's almost like thinking about it after the fact, a kind of negative precedent, because it really is not a very successful building, I would say, but it was a kind of heroic attempt to do exactly what you guys have done, I think, quite well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
While we're throwing out references, to me, my two here is, this is, let's say, Palace of the Soviets meets the Empire State Plaza in Albany. And the axial array of solids in Le Corbusier project is pushed out to the side, and water occupies, in classic imperious fashion. And so in a way, you're obviously carving and displacing, operating surgically, ruthlessly on mass that's both articulating an axis, yet the big hall also is a kind of vertiginous form, which has got its own energy to kind of spiral out these slabs. Then there's the run through of the kind of city and the raised platform through there. I mean, it makes me think of projects in the past, embassy projects and so forth for thesis projects where, representation, which Mariko is just kind of talking about, what's a representation of a certain kind of democratic situation or system, especially in the EU. It Brexit's and crumbling and who's joining and who's not joining, that it definitely feels like it's a project that can't avoid, let's say, the free association of that kind of representation. And then going back to, the nature of monumentality, I feel like if you took out and had a solid version of the void in your poetics of what is and what isn't, you'd almost have a curious kind of equivalence, which seems to be rather intentional, purely almost unbiased way in which solid and void are kind of played out. But that's the way in which I'm kind of reading it, kind of hieroglyphically. In that sense, it's kind of loaded with possible meanings relative to something like democracy, which makes it successful.
Sweet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's such a nice formal move, this like interconnecting all of these different pieces with the void. And this image, do you mind zooming in on that at the very bottom center? Maybe just kind of building, at the bottom row. You know what Brett was talking about, these, I just feel like these, Brett, you were calling them balconies or mezzanines or something, but just these are so powerful as kind of hinting towards an urban space that isn't just the datum from which we extrude our cities. Is just so exciting to me. It points at a whole different kind of city. It's like the building becomes an image of what that other reality might be, and it's just so cool and powerful. And it feels particularly contemporary right now for some reason. I've been thinking a lot recently about sort of giant protected indoor-outdoor spaces in architecture and how that relates to, in a way, humans these days not maybe wanting to be in hermetically sealed environments, but still needing protection from the elements, maybe shade and other things. And I just think these, in the kind of COVID world, these feel like so like mega indoor outdoor feels like a whole new typology for our cities, which don't have to do with program, but they have their formal typologies. And the way that you render them as having almost Baroque level of ornament and care and mirrored surfaces inside, even though they're outdoors, is so cool, because then you're just sort of playing with it and saying, yeah, it's indoor. No, it's outdoor. Yeah, it's indoor. So really brilliant. And I think the fact that they're not glazed in is really good. And it just seems like something really worth developing more. It's also, to say, it's just an absolutely mesmerizing object. Like seeing it pulled off the ground like this and spinning around and back back on the earth. It's very difficult to kind of tell what's going on, but you get there with such simple moves, which I think is the sign of a really good architect. And I'd say, keep that up. It's really wonderful, great piece, and feels, yeah, it's like post-COVID formal type. I don't know.
Thank you, Tom.
I don't know if that's that's good. Yeah. Thank you,
I mean,
guys.
I was
Great.
sure I was sure somebody was going to say the other reason it looks so contemporary is you can imagine an entire season of Westworld playing out in those weird big voids. Like it is a sort of urban landscape, and the art direction that goes into, in a real sense these days, to the design of this scale of building, it seems like it really is invoked by your incredibly controlled palette, your unwillingness to allow too many different kind of things to enter onto the stage, the role of the bronze screen to tie together what would be otherwise really disparate, chunky pieces of stuff, and that sort of really delicate balance between continuity and the dispersion of the field. I think it's just really nicely handled, and it I suppose that's the thing that makes it most familiar as a parliament, the idea that sort of thing is still somehow a civic necessity, that it really can't just be a pile of stuff, that all of the function takes place in. And, that's probably something likewise you could interrogate as successfully as the rest of the questions you put down. I think formally, and I'm sure you've spent a lot of time looking at OMA's first project, which is the Parliament for Holland that they do in '78, which is one of the few projects all of the partners and their first employee work on together. And it's in fact so fractured that they all immediately separate and divorce. But that, that project is willing to handle a huge amount of each piece being a different kind of animal, to the point that it looks like, in the proudest OMA sense, a bunch of junk at a sort of urban scale. But I think you really move away from that in an interesting way to try and argue for there being a certain amount of coherence, even if the formal pieces and entities, programmatic or formal, are really very different things. I think that's just a really cool leap past that sort of former moment of how a collage of different pieces sit in relation to the city. Maybe the one thing you do that's consistent with that project from '78, though, is that you do sort of mark out a singular field where the parliament has a beginning and an end. And one of the things I could still imagine with yours is that parts of these shards could have been sent out into the surrounding city or urban landscape around it, such that you can really, undermine that civic assumption that there's beginnings and ends to where that sort of stuff happens.
Just one more precedent to look at would be the unbuilt Paul Rudolph's Trans-Manhattan Expressway project. I think Brett's comment about being deployed out into the city, there is that sense of a kind of infrastructural continuity that is, the kind of multiplicity of movement systems of vehicles as well as people and in habitation. And I could imagine this would be a really fantastic project to take further into the thesis of what high density housing might offer as part of the kind of community that's associated with the government, because it is a representational piece as a solo right now, but it seems like it's a new topology of urban fabric that could be super interesting.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you guys so much. These are great. Great comments.
Congratulations, you guys. You made it.
Yeah.
You made it through SCIARC. Many years of hard work, and you guys have been such great students. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, congratulations, guys. Okay, I am not job. So awesome. And I'm glad you did that model. It's beautiful. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Buck the trend. Buck the trend. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. With copper material. It's a fun model to play with.
That's
There's
great.
all these different pieces.
I just put you in speaker mode. Everybody should put them in speaker mode now and check them out.
Okay, let me turn off the share screen.
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
So
yeah, these are these different pieces that come together.
yeah, there's like the way it separates out. It's like this.
Fabulous.
So yeah.
And they all come together.
So do we need to send the fire department over to lift that model off you guys?
Thank
Don't
you.
throw it away, okay?
Oh, of course not. I'm gonna keep it.
Cool.
Here's your model.
So any final comments for all of our students? If there's a few, we have a couple minutes left.
I would just say really fantastic work across the board. I found all of the projects to be really incredible propositions, really interesting work and well resolved and incredibly creative. I think, you know, they were not just resolved well, but so imaginative and great propositions. So congratulations.
Just echo Isla's a huge congratulations. And I think that the underpinning of what I liked was that the seriousness that a thesis asks you to take on was not paralyzing as it often can be, but was actually a kind of catalyst to, you know, experiment with some joy. And I think especially in this particular moment where we've been flattened into our flat files of Zoom, to be able to bring that highly tactile level of fearlessness into the kind of the formal, the architectural, and the broader narratives is amazing. So I've been super impressed and really enjoyed being able to see the work evolve, particularly as my sort of the privilege I've had of being special thesis advisor, to be able to see the evolution. I feel really excited, and I hope you all feel very proud of what you've achieved.
Yeah, as maybe like the other kind of accessory person alongside Marion for all of you guys' thesis projects. First of all, congratulations. I'm so proud of you. But also, it was really a joy to work with you this semester and also last semester, and to get to do sort of on the fly theorization and discussion with you as you developed your ideas alongside of your forms. I think it's so important that architects learn to work with the stuff of architecture and have the confidence to know, you know, as we were saying at the very beginning of the your thesis, I remember talking to the other advisors about this, that we work not in ideas, but in things. And the things produce the ideas at the end of the day. And it's been so satisfying to see the ideas emerge as you guys have worked. So congratulations.
I say the same thing in a different way, which is that everybody's project contributed to the study of a problem that we acknowledge as being relevant. Therefore, getting out of the proprietary aspect of thesis, and by extension, getting out of the worry of novelty, which I think has been some of the trajectory of the thesis, so that, as Marika just said, you end up, as it were, with progress, you know, when you work through the agreement that you're, you know, thinking collectively in kind of the same cultural concerns that architects should be. And it really felt like not necessarily a return, but I would say an extension and development of that idea of undergraduate thesis, which I think has staked out slightly different territories, let's say, than graduate thesis, as far as I can tell at SCIARC, for not for better or worse, just differently. And I felt genuinely connected to all the projects, even though I might think differently, because I'm gonna, you know, ask about rocks. There weren't all rocks, John. And the ones that were there were awesome. So anyway, thank you very much for inviting me.
Right on.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the day, and thank you to all the advisors and all the students, and special thanks on behalf of SCIARC to our visitors. Thanks so much for spending all your time on a Saturday.
Yeah, so you guys, strange times that we live in, and I just also want to, you know, just address that for 1 second, the way that you guys were so resilient this year. And I think I managed to really outdo yourselves. And I think it's really worth mentioning. This has been such a strange year, and I think you know, the way that you guys have been able to come together as a community and still operate has been super cool, and do really high level work. It's really imaginative. It's hard to imagine myself doing a thesis project in like in an apartment, you know, and trying to be your best creative self. And you guys were able to do it, and you're just totally committed, and it's really beautiful to see. So I'm going to be watching you guys and interested what comes next for all of you. And thanks to the jury. Thanks, Jenny, for doing such a great job coordinating. Thanks, Marion. It's been great having you, and Marika as the history theory advisor. So awesome thesis.
Yeah, awesome. And thanks for including us. It's been a wonderful journey today to see the kind of consolidation of all this exploration into really amazing projects.
Cool.
Great. Okay. Thank you. I guess we'll be, congratulations. I'll be ending this meeting.
Take care, everybody.